Welcome back to Pod Save the World. I'm Tommy Vietor.
I'm Ben Rhodes.
Ben, I normally like doing this show because I love doing this show because to some extent we get to focus on other countries' problems and not how broken our own country is and how we seem to think it's normal to have a civilian population that's better armed than most foreign militaries and how they're increasingly targeting children in mass shootings. But here we are, kicking off a show with another fucking mass shooting in Texas. The NRA convention is in Texas on Friday as well. So I'm sure they'll be thoughtful about all this.
Yeah, those people can go fuck off. I don't know what to say that people don't always say.
I just watched Senator Chris Murphy, friend of the pod, on the floor, like just so angry. It looked like he was about to rip up his desk and hulk it and throw it to the other side.
I mean, I guess you just have to say, as I think Chris Murphy would, as someone who never gives up on this, that like you just cannot allow yourself to be numbed to it. I have an elementary school age daughter, and I like the idea of dropping her off. I drop her off at school every day, and it's always like a slightly painful moment, to like give her a hug, but the idea of her not being there when I go to, I can't even what these parents are going through, and that this country and in states like Texas, frankly, prioritize like people having military weapons over the lives of their children, like is the ultimate expression of who they think this country is.
It's pure nihilism.
Yeah.
Because it's not after mass shootings like in El Paso, they have not made it harder to get guns. They have made it easier in some instances, like concealed carry goes away. And it's outrageous.
The point I keep coming back to, Tommy, like is that we sat in fucking meetings in the White House Situation Room for hour after hour after hour, mobilizing trillions of dollars to meet a absolute like zero tolerance for someone,
terrorist.
Yeah, like a terrorist, killing a few people. Like if a terrorist killed this many people with a truck bomb, we'd like go to war in 3 countries because of that, right? I took an airplane today, and I'm still wondering why the fuck I'm taking my shoes off.
Yeah.
The fact that this country has such warped national security priorities that it compelled us to spend trillions of dollars and fight wars in like more countries than people are even aware of, because of the risk of the kinds of attacks that kill less people than are killed each week in mass shootings in this country, is the ultimate insane statement of a country's priorities.
And then Texas in August 2021, passed a law allowing permitless carry. I mean, it's outrageous.
You can walk around with a semi-automatic weapon strapped to your fucking leg in Texas, but take your shoes off to get on an airplane because 20 years ago, some guy like tried to light a match by his shoe. Yeah. This is just insanity.
Well, we're going to try to channel our rage into action, because that's kind of what crooked media does. We also have a great show today. I'm going to pivot to a happier sounding voice. We're talk about a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about U.S. policy toward Taiwan, Biden's trip to Asia, the latest from Ukraine, a plot to assassinate George W. Bush. That was a wild story. Somalia, charges of anti-Semitism, fascism, and U.S. policy towards Israel, and then some fun with MAGA grifters, and then maybe a little Boris partying at the end.
I mean, why not?
You have to. Okay.
Mix that in.
Let's start with some news from President Biden's first trip to Asia as president. So Biden went to South Korea and then Japan. At a press conference in Tokyo, President Biden and the Japanese Prime Minister were asked how Japan and the U.S. would respond if China tried to invade Taiwan. Good question. So first, Biden said, our policy towards Taiwan has not changed at all. Then he goes into sort of an aside about how important it is that Putin pay a price for invading Ukraine. Then he says China's flirting with disaster by flying jets over Taiwan. And then he sort of reiterates that the U.S. supports the one China policy, but added, it does not mean that China has the jurisdiction to go in and use force to take over Taiwan. Then the reporter follows up, and this is where it gets complicated and interesting. Here's a clip.
Very quickly, you didn't want to get involved in the Ukraine conflict militarily for obvious reasons. Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are?
That's the commitment we made. That's the commitment we made. We are not, look, here's the situation. We agree with a one China policy. We signed on to it. And all the attendant agreements made from there. But the idea that it can be taken by force, just taken by force, is just not appropriate. It will dislocate the entire region and be another action similar to what happened in Ukraine. And so it's a burden that is even stronger.
So real quick, the gist of the one China policy is that Biden mentioned there is that the U.S. recognizes the Chinese government in Beijing, but also believes, Beijing and Taiwan need to sort out their historical differences peacefully. We can go into that history if you want, Ben. Yeah. But also we arm Taiwan and help it defend itself. So after the press conference ended, Ben and I got a flurry of emails from White House press corps folks. The White House official told reporters that Biden's comments were to change in policy. But this is like the third time, I think, that he has suggested otherwise when it comes to Taiwan. He's leaned into a more of a hawkish position. Obviously, his words take on added meaning given what's happening in Ukraine and because the words were spoken in Japan, where this threat feels even more real. Ben, what do you think is going on here? Is Biden overstating the policy and then walking it back? Is that the ultimate form of strategic ambiguity, a term we should explain?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. And first of all, I will say in that clip, it's always interesting when the reporters ask a question and the answer is, she's like, you are?
Yeah,
like she did not expect to get the answer. Like she expected to get the brush off.
But Ben, Politico had a description of all the sort of senior officials in the front row, and they said that Rahm Emanuel's eyes bulged out of his head.
Yeah. Well, I've seen that.
You've seen that?
Not good when it happens. Look, so first of all, this is a hugely impactful statement. And what was particularly kind of unusual or strange to me in the answer is when he says that's a commitment we made.
Right.
Because it's actually not. The U.S. we have, I mean, just to be very clear with people, with Japan, we have a treaty. They are a treaty ally like a NATO ally. And so if Japan is invaded by China, we have an obligation. We have a commitment we made to come to its defense. And we also have bases in Japan. Right. So we have a military presence.
Like Article 5.
For that, NATO. Yeah, it's the same thing, right? We do not have that with Taiwan. We do have a commitment to kind of help support their military, but it is not like a defense commitment like we will go to war to defend Taiwan. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say that the one China policy that Biden referenced does feel like a bit rickety here in the sense that, just to do the quick history piece of this, the government of Taiwan for a long time was basically the Chiang Kai-shek exiles from mainland China. The people who lost the Chinese Civil War to the Communist Party moved to Taiwan, where there, by the way, already were a bunch of people, and they kind of set up this government that was an autocracy, a U.S.-backed autocracy, and they claimed that they were also the government of China. When the United States repaired relations with the People's Republic of China, part of what we did is we said we recognize there's only one China, but everybody kind of thought...
Thank you, Dick Nixon, by the way.
Well,
shout out, Dickie Dick.
Shout out. It was the ultimate, kick a can down the road and assume that it all sorted itself out.
Right.
Well, what's happened ever since the Taiwan Relations Act around the Carter administration is that you've had the Taiwanese government become a democracy. You've had the Taiwanese government really lose its roots in that kind of mainland Chinese exile community. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to have anything to do with China. They don't want to be swallowed up by the People's Republic of China, which has also become much more belligerent. And the kind of negotiated settlement that they once envisioned, where you might have one country, two systems in China and Taiwan, they looked at that promise broken in Hong Kong, and the Taiwanese are like, we don't want any part of this. Right. So the idea that the U.S. needs to think about what does that mean, that is an important conversation. The problem is saying outrightly that you would go to war for Taiwan when we haven't made that kind of formal diplomatic commitment. Is that ironclad? How do the Chinese react to that? The Taiwanese might want to keep the strategic ambiguity because they don't want to provoke China into being more aggressive because they're trying to get out in front of the U.S. Getting more involved militarily. So, look, I understand what he's speaking to, which is he doesn't want to look like he's hiding behind some gobbledygook diplomatic language, because usually you stand up to say, well, we have one China policy and we recognize, the 3 communiques from decades ago. But this is one where if you can't explain after the fact what that means, I think that it doesn't really help add clarity.
Yeah, it's all like clearly Biden is trying to signal that he thinks it would be immoral, horrific, evil for China to
all
just
right,
take
all true.
right,
Yeah.
fair. It's always funny though when you sort of lean too far over policy and then a bunch of senior officials have to give statements that are like, no, nothing changed. I don't know what you're talking about here.
No, what are you talking about? Nothing. But you're right that
Ignore your lying eyes.
He's said this now like multiple times in very different venues. He said it in like a town hall once, I think.
Yes.
And so clearly Joe Biden believes this.
Where he is.
Like, like in that matters, he's the president. But it does kind of call into question, though, like, what does that mean? Like, how do we square a status quo in which the United States formally says there's only one China and Taiwan is a part of it, with the idea that actually, no, this is a democracy that has moved in its own direction, that wants nothing to do with China, and the Chinese are building up their military to potentially invade that country. This is a huge flash button issue. And so I think that there should be, I think, more transparency and discussion about, like, what is our commitment? What are we willing to do? Why are we willing to do it? And what does it mean for our China policy writ large?
Yeah, for sure. A couple more notes from Biden's trip. So Biden met with the Quad, which is how NSC nerds try to brand meetings between the U.S., Australia, India, and Japan for some reason. In one of his press avails, Biden said that when he gets back home, he will talk to Secretary Yellen about potentially lifting U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods. Wall Street liked that a lot. Biden met with the new Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, for the first time. Shout out to our Aussie friends for taking out Scott Morrison, the McDonald's.
Yeah, send him back to McDonald's, yeah.
Send him back to McDonald's. A dozen or so countries announced the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which basically sounds like an intention to work together to try to forge new diplomatic agreements around trade, climate change, supply chain resiliency, and sort of tax and anti-corruption measures. Taiwan was not a part of that announcement, notably. And then finally, Biden was asked if he had a message for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He said, hello.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good,
That's
right?
a pretty good line, yeah.
Any meta takeaways from the rest of the trip for you, Ben?
I mean, look, they are clearly, well, first of all, like the Albanese win, like huge win for the planet. Great work,
Clap it
Aussie
up.
World. Those
Labor Party did well. The independent parties did well. The Greens.
Yeah, the Greens. Like, and I think, if you look at Canada, Australia, New Zealand, you've seen a succession of center-left victories. Hopefully that spreads to the United Kingdom as we're moving around the Commonwealth here. I think that they want to demonstrate that these relationships that they have in the Asia-Pacific region, or the Indo-Pacific region as it was rebranded in the Trump years,
Great.
which is part of the point, is that India, they want to be a part of these conversations. They want to, and this is a Kurt Campbell special, right? Like our former colleague, Kurt Campbell.
I emailed him
who's the
today
Asia director,
because he got a shout out from the Australians.
But
he wrote me back while they were refueling in Alaska.
He did.
Diligent Kurt.
He's like, he's on it. He's always working. But one of the things that we used to always talk about is, like, can you turn these relationships that we have in Asia into kind of an architecture? Like in the transatlantic relationship, you have, NATO, and you have, G7, which is a very European-centric organization, even though you have Japan in there, and you have, all manner of transatlantic institutions, the OSCE, a lot of acronyms. In Asia Pacific, you have the U.S. has a bunch of allies, and they're trying to create connectivity among those allies that begins to look like an architecture like we have in the U.S. and European relationship. So the Quad is an effort. The Quad also refers to the U.S. and France and Germany and the U.K. having. So I think they're trying to kind of signal, like, we're stitch together these relationships into something that is more of a structure, and we're going to engage the 10 Southeast Asian countries. That's ASEAN, and we're going to go to the East Asia Summit where we meet with ASEAN. The challenge with this is that, what is the what at the end of the day, and I think that the trade and investment framework thing that you mentioned, raises one of the awkward realities for them, which is that the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement was that before.
And the Japanese prime minister said, like, well, I wish you'd get back into the TPP, but this is okay. We'll talk about this.
Yeah, so like that's a formal trade agreement that the U.S. negotiated, that then all the other parties to that agreement joined it, but the U.S. pulled out because Trump was against it. Okay,
and Hillary.
And Hillary. So maybe you don't like free trade agreements, but the question is, can this become something that is actually meaningful and is not just something you announce on a trip, but something that has depth and weight to it. So I think, look, they're drawing the outlines of what they would like the future of collaboration in this region to look like. They want India in the deal. They want these countries talking not just to the United States, but to each other. That's all good. But there's just a lot of follow-through that's going to have to come behind it.
Take a lot of time. Last really quick thing. You mentioned New Zealand. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is in the U.S. She's going to New York, D.C., and Boston. It's mostly a trade mission, but she's giving the commencement at Harvard University. Very fancy. Congratulations. What is TBD, however, is whether she will meet with Joe Biden in D.C. because she got COVID.
Or come to Pod Save the World.
On May 14th.
She's invited here.
Well, that's what I'm going to say. Yeah. So she got COVID. She had to isolate. There's some sort of I don't know, they're trying to figure out if she can get in there to see Biden. I don't know. It's been more than 10 days since her diagnosis. The anxiety, they could just sit outside on the porch outside the Oval, whatever. But what I'm trying to say is, Prime Minister Ardern, if you want to fill the void of not having a Biden meeting, give us a call. Come
Always welcome at this table.
Huge fans.
Like I say, I think it's really important that the U.S. express support for leaders trying to do the right thing. So I hope that they're able to meet her.
She's one of the most successful leaders of the last half decade.
Well, and Trump wraps his arms around people like Viktor Orban, and I think we should be less bashful on the center left progressive side of things in backing up our people around the world.
I think it's just a COVID thing, and they're kind of
no, I know, and it's not a shot at that. I'm just saying I hope it works out.
Me too. Okay, let's talk about Ukraine, because the war has been raging for exactly 3 months as we record. So quick little roundup of news. A guy named Boris Bondarev, a diplomat at Russia's mission to the United Nations in Geneva, resigned, went public with his criticism. Then I hope this guy has been approached by some intelligence service and offered some protection, because this kind of stuff gets you killed.
Yeah, you get poisoned
by Putin. Yeah, somewhere you have tea in London, and all of a sudden things go south. Russia has been caught stealing Ukrainian grain reserves, just in case you didn't think Putin was a monster. Russian ships have taken Ukrainian grain to Syria and to parts of Crimea that they control. Russia is also blockading Ukrainian ports and preventing food and fertilizer exports, which is exacerbating global shortage and famine. I want to dig into that a little more in a second. The British government has decided now is a good time to cut direct humanitarian aid in half. So Boris had to find a way to pay for all those parties, I guess. Ukrainian court sentenced a captured Russian soldier to life in prison. The U.S. is now very publicly speculating on secondary sanctions, something we've talked about in the past, ways to punish countries for buying Russian oil, or potentially setting an artificially low cap that you have to pay. Break even for Russia is $40 a barrel, and maybe saying to the international community, you can buy at this price, but any more will sanction the shit out of you. And then the last thing is the first of these American-made M777 howitzers are slowly getting deployed. They're active in Ukraine. That means the Ukrainian military now has this very lethal long-range artillery capability, so they can fire from even further away than the Russians can. And it comes as fighting in eastern Ukraine is getting more intense and brutal. Zelensky, I don't know if this is for the first time, said that up to 100 Ukrainian soldiers a day are dying or getting killed. So that's a pretty stark casualty count. So Ben, the New York Times ran an editorial the other day calling on Biden to basically lay out goals in an endgame. They wrote, a decisive military victory for Ukraine over Russia, in which Ukraine regains all the territory Russia has seized since 2014, is not a realistic goal. They basically said, you have to tell Zelensky that there's a limit to U.S. support. Get ready to cut a deal. This pissed off basically everyone in Ukraine, a lot of progressives, a lot of conservatives. Where are you 3 months into this? Because you and I talked a lot about an off-ramp talks between Zelensky and Russia, us facilitating them. But I don't know. I'm not sure. A lot of people are saying no. There's a chance for them to roll back Russia completely and maybe, check Russian imperialism or militarism for a longer time frame.
I think, first of all, all the things you say speak to kind of a third phase of the war, right? A phase one was this kind of failed effort by Russia to decapitate the Ukrainian government. Phase two was this kind of beginning of the protracted fight that is still ongoing in the Donbass and southern Ukraine. This phase is also about just kind of sustainment. And if you look at the different things you mentioned, right, you worry about, will all the assistance to Ukraine start to dry up when it's no longer the headline news, right? A Boris Johnson who jumped on the PR bandwagon. Is he going to be there?
He went to Kiev 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, is he going to be there in 3 months, 6 months? The sanctions. the sanctions, the holes that emerge in sanctions regimes are when basically other countries around the world are like, we're going to keep buying this Russian oil and we're going to keep doing business with these people. And then the secondary sanctions you say is, are we going to be willing to kind of go around and sanction other countries, not Russia, but the countries that continue to do business with Russia? That is harder to do. It is time consuming. It is difficult. It is economically disruptive. But that is going to be required if you really want this pressure to stick on the Russians. And all of this leads to the question of like, well, how does this end if we're in this kind of grinded out, protracted, really deadly fighting in eastern Ukraine, southern Ukraine, and there's this kind of status quo hardening. I see where the New York Times editorial is coming from, right? Like if you want just an end to the killing, if basically someone could say, hey, go back to the way things were at the beginning of this war, which is kind of what the Times is suggesting, and that's better than all these people dying every day. I understand where that impulse comes from, but, very big but, first of all, we don't get to decide. Yeah. I mean, I think, whatever you think, the Ukrainians are the one whose country was invaded. And if the Ukrainians don't feel like they can say, you can keep Mariupol and you can keep the whole Donbass if we just have a ceasefire, if they're not going to do that, this is kind of a pointless, not pointless because it's important to have a discussion, but it's kind of like a discussion that assumes we have more agency than I think we do, unless we're willing to say, hey, we're going to stop giving you weapons unless you agree to this, which I think...
And that's kind of what the Times is getting at, I think. And saying, we might cut off,
I wouldn't 40... do that. Yeah.
Well, and to your point, I mean, it does seem like President Zelensky has zero running room here. I mean, I saw the Kiev Independent said that there was a poll that showed that basically 82% of Ukrainians refused to leave territory under Russian occupation. I think that was the statistic.
He was willing, by the way, to the off-ramp advocates, of which, I've been one a lot, but he was willing in the early days of the war. He made noises about saying he wouldn't join NATO. Yeah. He made noises about, Crimea, we understand, there's a status quo there. He
sent his defense minister to negotiations.
And then the Russians basically destroyed Mariupol and, committed all manner of war crimes around Kyiv. And you can understand why they're not in a position yet to say, well, these parts of our country are occupied and there are mass deportations and killings happening in those parts of the country. But, the people in Davos say, we need an off-ramp. I mean, they want an off-ramp. I bet you that the Ukrainians would like an off-ramp from the war. I just think we have to be humble about our capacity to dictate that off-ramp. And we also have to understand here that, Vladimir Putin gets a vote too. And the reality is, we did pause this war. There was a negotiated kind of quasi-ceasefire for a bunch of years. And it's not like that ended the war. The Minsk agreements that were reached in 2015. Yep. So it's just more complicated. I understand where this is coming from, but I think the Ukrainians have to be the ones to dictate what kind of end state they can live with. And, we're not, I think, at the point yet where we can tell them 3 months into this thing, hey, we're going to cut you off if you don't agree to X, Y, and Z.
Here's one area where the clock is really ticking, which is this issue of an impending food shortage. Because we've got Russians now, we're learning they're stealing grain from Ukrainian silos. Farmers can't plant for obvious reasons because they're fighting or their fields are being blown up. Russia is sanctioned, so they can't export things. Commercial ships can't get to Ukrainian ports and move their stored grain abroad because the Russian Navy is blockading the ports. Experts are saying that we might have, a couple months before this becomes a huge crisis, especially in poor countries. And on top of that, Russia is a huge exporter of fertilizer. And so I was listening to a BBC World Service report today about a rice farmer in Thailand who's not going to be able to have the same crop that he normally has because he can't get his hands on fertilizer. So this is a ticking time bomb for the world, for the poorest countries in the world more than anybody.
Yeah. No, and I talked to Linda Thomas Greenfield about this, the ambassador to the UN in the interview. I think that one of the things that needs to be done is some of the remaining islands of support, or not support, but kind of fence sitting vis-a-vis Russia, are in parts of the world that are quite vulnerable to these food shortages. And so I think diplomatically, you have to stitch together an effort to try to unlock at least some of the flow of this wheat and other and fertilizer from the Odessa port in Ukraine, from all the blockaded material that's not getting out of Ukraine. Like, this is one where it shouldn't just be the U.S. and Europe. Like, everybody has skin in this game, and I do think that if you have a different assortment of countries in this vis-a-vis Russia, saying like, you are going to kill untold numbers of people in all parts of the world and unleash greater instability, like, you just got to keep pushing and pushing on this.
Yeah. Okay, Ben, so here is a very weird story. The FBI arrested a Columbus, Ohio man named Shihab Ahmed Shihab for allegedly trying to get 4 to 6 individuals from Iraq into the U.S. via Mexico to kill former President George W. Bush. The attack was supposed to be in the name of ISIS. This guy was, I guess, under FBI surveillance the whole time, so presumably there wasn't a huge risk. He was talking to a confidential U.S. informant. Doesn't seem like Bush was in any real danger, but he did travel to Dallas and take video around Bush's home, so it's scary. I never know. The FBI always like announces and rolls up these plots where like they've been communicating with some 19-year-old, gave him an inert bomb, said planted at this parade, like something like that. And it's always hard to judge like how real the threat was or was not, or if this is just, an idiot that got pulled into something. But I don't know. Caught my eye.
Yeah, no, it would. But I think that the way in which you try to separate it is like, is there some kind of formal terrorist organizational planning behind this? Is there an Al-Qaeda cell somewhere plotting this or whatever? This has the flavor of like a radicalized individual like texting with the FBI, feels less acute than other threats, although it reminds you what's out there. It reminded me of that Iranian, that plot where allegedly they were going to smuggle people across the Mexican border and then
to
assassinate
DC, right?
the Saudi ambassador in Cafe Milano.
Yeah, in like a Georgetown ritzy restaurant.
Which again, like, there may very well have been some planning behind it, but sometimes the ambition outstrips like anything that is actually going to happen.
I remember Ben and I used to share an office in the basement of the West Wing. I remember that one breaking and kind of looking at each other being like, what?
I don't think that's crazy. Like, but this one feels, that one though, there was like, I think some chatter and some, the potential IRGC involvement. This feels like a guy sitting at his computer talking to the FBI.
Speaking of counterterrorism, so last week, the New York Times reported that President Biden signed an order redeploying hundreds of special operations forces to Somalia. So that reversed a decision by Trump that he made on his way out the door to pull about 700 ground troops from the country. Biden is not sending that full number back in. Force is going to be capped at 450, but he's also given the Pentagon the authority to target about a dozen leaders of al-Shabaab, which is a terrorist group in Somalia that pledged allegiance to al-Qaeda back in 2012. So that's why I think they're treated pretty differently. The Somali parliament selected a new president in early May. They welcomed this announcement. So Ben, it seems like this might be, I can't tell how big of a change this is because some of the reporting suggested that U.S. military trainers were basically flying in and out of Somalia for 2 months at a time. That approach was wasteful, ineffective, dangerous, kind of like screwing up the mission. But I don't know. It's also kind of hard for me to judge at this point, like a decade after reading intelligence, how much of a threat al-Shabaab is.
Well, and a decade of this approach, which again, like, full disclosure, like the Obama administration pursued, the Trump administration pursued. So this is not one that in any way originated with Biden. But to me, one other thing to look at is the pace of drone strikes in Somalia, which, there have been a lot of allegations of civilian casualties over the years. And al-Shabaab is still there despite all this effort. And you would like to see more of a focus on the political viability of Somalia, which is, by the way, also at great risk from these food shortages that we just talked about. and like we talk about ending forever wars. This is a reminder that's not just Afghanistan. Like that's Somalia as well as other places. So I think the thing to watch is this a training mission? Is there an uptick in drone activity and kind of U.S. kind of direct military activity in Somalia or not? If it's just like something to facilitate additional training, I think that's less of an escalation than if more special ops leads to more drone strikes, which leads to kind of just more, U.S. involvement in a conflict that is, doesn't appear to have a military solution when it's been going on for not just a decade, but in some ways several decades.
Yeah, and I think it's a question of, is this really a super targeted effort to get al-Shabaab leadership, or are there going to be a bunch of drone strikes on,
fighters,
what is assumed to be a dozen guys in the back of a truck who are presumed to be fighters that are doing something that looks nefarious to someone.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a big distinction.
Yeah, and you got to make sure that all these countries in the region are on board here and rowing in the same direction. And so it's not just a kind of a U.S. And that's generally been the case. You've had Kenya play a big role here. Yeah. But, I don't think turning the escalation dial back up makes a lot of sense at this point.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that the super targeted sort of intelligence version is perfect either.
By the way, this is another reason why there should be a new authorization for the use of military force out of Congress, right? Because, we are in Somalia at war under the authority granted to George Bush after 9/11. Mm-hmm. Now, the legal rationale, and I know because it was in the Obama administration too, is that because al-Shabaab pledged allegiance to al-Qaeda like a decade ago, they're an associated force, and that is past its expiration date, and it has been for a long time. This is a reason why if the U.S. thinks it should be at war with the terrorist organization in Somalia, the executive branch should be able to go to Congress and say, hey, Congress, vote to authorize the deployment of these special forces to Somalia. That doesn't happen, and that's part of the way you get forever wars. And again, that's on everybody. That's on
Democrats,
Republicans, Obama, Biden, definitely Congress.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's dive into the not at all sensitive topic of anti-Semitism, nationalism, and support for Israel. Excited?
Yeah, that always works out well.
It works out well for everybody. Yeah. So first, a little background. So the Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC, is happening in Hungary this week. President Trump spoke to it via video, so did Tucker Carlson. CPAC Hungary also featured a notorious Hungarian racist who uses racial epithets to describe black people and referred to Jews as, quote, stinking excrement. I have not seen CPAC Hungary get called out for featuring the speaker or condemned by the ADL or relevant groups. The ADL, however, did condemn the communications director of a progressive group called the Justice Democrats for tweeting a joke about a fictional news outlet called Goy Outsider. He was retweeting an article from the Jewish Insider, making a stupid joke, whatever. Now, Ben, I'm not the arbiter of things anti-Semitic or not. I've been called a Goy a lot of times in my life, usually by my Jewish friends who make fun of me for being the most Aryan-looking person they've ever seen.
I think I've probably called you a Goy.
But I don't know if you have a...
I don't know if I've called you a Goy outsider, but I think I've called you separately a Goy and an outsider.
Do you have a gut check on Goy? Does that one ring your any bells for you?
Is that canceled? You? I don't...
I have no idea.
This is worth... Look, the Hungary situation, Viktor Orban is an anti-Semite who engages in not just dog whistles, but dog shouts at George Soros as a shadowy international financier seeking to control Hungarian politics. Like, I've been to Budapest and been shown like the kind of rehabilitation of like fascist era Hungarian collaborative governments and the diminishment of what happened to the Jews in Hungary, in part because of the collaboration of their own government. Like there's the bill of goods that one could assemble on Viktor Orban as an anti-Semite is very clear. What he's also done is he forged an alliance with Bibi Netanyahu. There was a total alliance of convenience wherein Viktor Orban would block EU efforts to support the Palestinians. And then Bibi Netanyahu would say, oh, no, Viktor Orban, he's a good guy. And oh, by the way, like Viktor Orban's first political consultants when he ran for prime minister in 2010 had been previously Bibi Netanyahu. So there's just kind of this weird nexus. It's a right-wing thing. It's not an ethno-religious thing. but it's uncomfortable. And look, I write about this in my book out on paperback today about being spied on by Black Cube, an outfit of former Mossad agents who were also spying on Hungarian civil society on behalf of Viktor Orban. It's a very strange set of bedfellows happening here. To get to the ADL point, though, it's a total absurd joke for them to be singling out like that kind of speech, goy outsider as the issue. Like the issue, and I talk about this with Hungarian Jews in my book, like the rise of right-wing ethno-nationalism is a problem.
It doesn't end well for Jews.
It's a problem for the Jewish people specifically. These are not forces that you want to align yourself with or make alliances of convenience with. It always leads to the worst possible places for Jews. And yes, is there some like hatred directed at Israel that speaks to a dangerous strain of anti-Semitism? Yes. I would also argue, though, that like the rise of far-right nationalism around the world cries out for attention from organizations like the ADL that are dedicated to combating anti-Semitism. And this kind of like putting points on the board against the progressive left in this country, like on behalf of Israel, is not the center of gravity of where people should be focused on anti-Semitism.
So let me flesh this out because I agree. And I think I don't raise this CPAC Hungary and what was said about Walid just to do whataboutism, right? Because that's not what I'm trying to do here. But I think that when charges of anti-Semitism or criticism of policy towards Israel is used to just sort of attack political opponents, that's where you get into trouble. For example, you mentioned this last week. AIPAC's political action committee is called United Democracy Project. It was ostensibly created to support pro-Israel candidates. The group spent over $2 million attacking a Democratic congressional candidate named Summer Lee in Pennsylvania's 12th district by saying she isn't a real Democrat. But AIPAC also endorsed over 100 Republican candidates who voted to overturn the 2020 election result. So that's just as cynical an attack as you can get.
Including some who have quite flirtatious relationships with far-right nationalism.
For sure. The similar group, the Democratic Majority for Israel, DMFI, in 2020, DMFI spent millions of dollars attacking Congressman Jamal Bowman in his primary against then Congressman Elliot Engel. One of the ads said Bowman had unpaid taxes, and DMFI left it on air despite Engel telling them to pull it. My point is, if you want to attack political candidates for being insufficiently pro-Israel, by all means do. But endorsing insurrectionists and then calling Summer Lee a bad Democrat is just too cynical for me not to call out. Similarly, when the ADL criticizes a dumb joke like Walid's Goy Outsider and then tells the press specifically, their spokespeople said, we did this because his organization, the Justice Democrats, criticizes Israel. That is also bad because you aren't objectively calling out anti-Semitism. You are saying liberals who criticize the Israeli government need to be on notice. We will check your ass.
We will primary your ass. And this is dangerous.
But even more, but the random spokesman for the Justice Democrats, like we're going to fucking destroy your reputation for the rest of your life because you're part of an organization that, criticizes settlement construction. But Donald Trump can go to CPAC Hungary, say whatever he wants.
Yes, this is the point.
But as long as he's up Bibi's ass, we will never criticize him. And that, in my opinion, harms efforts to call out and stop anti-Semitism.
It is flat out dangerous and disingenuous. It's bullshit. And look, if they wanted to sit down and have a debate and say, okay, Justice Democrats, let's sit down and argue about Israeli-Palestinian policy, that'd be one thing. The fact that they run ads that don't even, this is what is so, this is the biggest tell in the world. They're not even running ads saying, here's something that X congressional candidate said about Israel, we believe this. No, they run bullshit ads saying that they're bad Democrats or they're scary this or scary that. Mm-hmm. They're not even willing to engage in that debate. They just kind of, they dump money on people's heads and then call people who point that out anti-Semites, And that is bad for everybody. That is... And it's the ADL and this whole, whatever happened to the social justice traditions in the American Jewish community that literally used to make arguments on behalf of Israel, based on social justice.
Values.
Now are making arguments based on ethno-nationalism, which is not the argument that I think is the one that ends well for the Jewish people.
Or anywhere.
Anywhere. Or anybody.
And by the way, there might be some listeners who think you're just defending your buddies in the Justice Democrats or in DSA, the Democratic Socialists.
I don't know. I've never met most of these people.
Just to be clear, I think when the DSA attacked Jamal Bowman for supporting the Iron Dome system, that was incredibly stupid.
It was even dumber when they attacked him for visiting Israel with the J Street trip. So, I'm more than happy to.
Some of the people, some of the leftists who are part of the DSA have been some of the most vicious critics of me personally, of you, of media, right? So we're not defending our buddies. Like, I think I have a little more credibility here to call out what is actually a really bad faith attack against Waleed, Bernie Sanders, Summer Lee, Jennifer Cisneros down in Texas. Like, they're just attacking, these groups are pretending to be in support of pro-Israel policies, but they're just attacking progressive Democrats. And I think we should call it out because they're spending a ton of money.
And they're pushing people away from a constructive conversation.
Especially young Jews.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's just, anyway. Okay. Well, that will certainly not get us in any trouble on the internet. The last time it's great.
I waited about this, like, Mike Pompeo called me an anti-Semite.
So, did he?
Yeah.
Well,
that's good.
Honestly, enemies like that, it's kind of a good thing. Speaking of MAGA grifters, Ben.
Mike Pompeo?
Credit to the New York Times for continuing to report on Jared Kushner and Steve Mnuchin's new investment firms. They pointed out that Jared's final 3 trips to the Middle East after the election and Mnuchin's Middle East swing after the election, it was cut short by the insurrection, by the way, clearly mixed government and future business interests. They also reported on how both of them hired a bunch of people from their respective sort of government teams, the sort of Abraham Accord teams, to set up these new investment shops, despite not having any investment experience. I think these stories are still kind of missing the other piece of this, which is this inherent suggestion that Jared Kushner is making when he goes to a foreign government for investment money, which is to say, Daddy's running again.
Yeah.
I'll be back in there. Don't you worry.
Yeah. I mean, like, this is the thing. I mean, these guys literally cashing in while they're in government, like greasing their post-government careers to the tune of billions of dollars, a scale of corruption that, we just haven't seen.
Unfathomable.
Yeah. But also, like, very clearly trading on the likelihood that, Trump is going to run again. And maybe these guys, think that they're making a down payment on the next administration as well, knowing that people like Jared will deliver the goods for them. And also, like, by the way, undermining, I mean, the quaint notion that we have a president now who has interests like that he's seeking to deal with in that region, and these guys are like, no, like, wait it out, like, we'll do everything you want.
We got you covered.
Yeah.
The other thing we learned last week is that the Department of Justice is suing disgraced casino magnate Steve Wynn for lobbying for Trump on behalf of the Chinese government when he was finance chairman of the RNC. Wynn tried to get a Chinese billionaire dissident deported, and then he tried to help out his business in Macau. So, great stuff happening.
These are the people that,
this is just shocking corruption.
Well, and it's like, Mnuchin and to a lesser extent Steve Wynn are supposed to be like the, more mainstream MAGA grifters, I guess. Like,
they're sort of
they've been around for, like, it just
business people.
Everybody, it's just when you have a corrupt enterprise like this, like, it makes, like, it brings out the worst aspects of, I mean, like, Steve Wynn,
he's disgraced for
pretty
other
disgraceful guy
reasons,
to begin with. So I'm not suggesting, but like, it is the case that these aren't just like the Seb Gorkas and the, Alex Joneses and the, this is the entire enterprise of this is what Trumpism is about in the end. It's basically people weaponizing ethno-nationalism and grievance for personal profit, talking out of one mouth about how tough they are on the Chinese while they're like seeking to deport Chinese billionaires and get like Macau casino licenses. Like, it's all a grift,
Yeah, I mean, Steve Wynn's just like taking calls from the vice premier and thinking that's just another thing he can trade and, pass the message along to Donald Trump and then help out his casino.
Yeah.
It's so brazen. Also, he could have avoided these charges if he just filed under FARA, the Foreign Agent Registration Act, but he refused to do it.
Yeah,
which, probably tells you everything you need to know about how these rich guys think about laws.
Well, that's exactly the point. It tells you that a guy like Steve Wynn thinks that if I do my RNC duty, like, I don't have to follow the law. And that's what they think. They think the law doesn't apply to them.
Yeah, well, in fact, Trump did pardon Elliot Broidy, who was accused of, sort of similar crimes. He pardoned Steve Bannon. So
pardon all these guys, jokers, Mike Flynn, and like, so they have already, like, we always have the threats to democracy, and where we're going, like, we are here. We are living in a country where there are different sets of laws that have been applied to these people, and they're trying to build an entire system where that is made permanent. Like that is the stakes involved here.
Meanwhile, in the actual Middle East, President Biden has reportedly decided to keep the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps on the Foreign Terrorist Organization lists, which is a Trump-era sanction that will probably do nothing in practice to hurt Iran, but will prevent Iran from getting back the nuclear deal.
This sanction was put in place by Trump after he pulled out of the JCPOA, precisely because it was meant to be politically difficult for a future Democratic president to lift this sanction to get back in the JCPOA. This sanction does fucking nothing. The IRGC is not coming out with their hands up and saying, hey, we surrender, guys. We give up. We're going to stop our malign behavior and give up our nuclear program because you put us on a list, okay?
No, in fact.
Whereas, like, the JCPOA would roll back their nuclear program. So given the choice, you have a choice. Do I keep a meaningless designation that has a political benefit in the United States, or do I roll back the Iranian nuclear program and avert a potential nuclear crisis in the Middle East? Deciding that designation is more important than that deal will never make any sense. Just so you know where I stand on that issue.
In fact, Iran, I think this week, vowed revenge in Israel for the assassination of an Iranian colonel in Tehran. I guess this guy was linked to plots to kidnap Israeli diplomats abroad. Someone pulled up next to him on a motorcycle, shot into his car 5 times. He's dead. Now Iran's plotting their revenge. So yeah, it doesn't seem like the malign activities have stopped. And then
hopefully they cave, by the way. I mean, I know. Hopefully the Iranians still come in this deal. Like, this could still have a good ending. I don't think this sanction. People need to be making the point that I'd like someone to lay out what has it been accomplished. Like, look at the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard's behavior before this sanction and after. Is anything different?
No.
Yeah.
Last thing on the Middle East, Biden is reportedly considering a visit to the Middle East in June. A visit to Israel might be on the table, and a meeting with Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, who likes bone saws and executing American journalists. So
it's not worth it.
Depressing state of affairs in terms of the political risk to Biden from high gas prices, at least in his advisor's heads, versus the risk of meeting with someone who is a sociopath.
Yeah, I mean, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it, And by the way, it's not, do we really think Mohammed bin Salman is going to solve our gas price problem?
No, I think he's just going to wait it out for Trump to come back.
Yeah,
that's what he wants.
Otherwise, he wouldn't be sinking $2 billion into Jared Enterprises.
Nope. He's got his down payment in. Last thing, Ben, did you see that ITV got a hold of pictures of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson partying during lockdown? ITV's been owning this story, by the way.
And there's like a lot of booze on the table.
So he's boozing with like 9 people. There's bottles everywhere. He's raising literally doing a toast with some bubbly. This rager was on November 13th, 2020. I think that is like almost the exact day when Hannah and I canceled our flights to see her parents for Thanksgiving, so we knew it was unsafe. It was a going away party for his communications director at Downing Street, who presumably knew that lockdown rules were in place and you were only allowed to mix 2 people from different households. Also, complicating this for Boris, the police fined others who were at this rager, but not Boris. Boris got fined for being at a different rager. The full official report on partying and culture at Number 10 comes out this week. It could not be more obvious that Boris lied to Parliament and the British people. Here's a fun little clip of how ITV described it.
Have these photos taken the fizz out of his defence?
Because they call champagne
I
fizz.
didn't know that clip was coming. That is so perfect.
It seems like he's going to get away with it, though.
Yeah, because he doesn't give a shit. There's like a bottomless absence of shame. I will like what is next here? Like, did you ever have those ragers in college where you had like the bathtub full of like the Everclear punchers? Like, I could literally see these guys like dipping, like sharing like some I don't know.
Though, they're going to come out with Boris Johnson at the ice
like
luge
swimming,
during lockdown.
Like swimming in a hot tub full of booze with like a bunch of staff. I mean, like, what more do we need to establish that this guy broke the rules and thought there were one set of rules that applied to everybody else? And I don't know. And what are these ragers like? These Tory party? I mean, maybe they're fun. I don't know. Like,
Well, we did read about all the cocaine.
well, maybe
in,
Madison Cawthorn was a little confused. Maybe he was over there and they're doing key bumps in the bathroom, at Toya HQ. I don't know. Like,
you just connected the dots for me.
yeah.
That's pretty good. Okay. Well, we exercise some demons. I'm sure the Daily Wire is going to have fun with this episode. Ben, I have two things I wanted to tell the listeners to read because we didn't have time to cover. It's hard to cover long stories. One is the New York Times did amazing reporting on Haiti and how the country was forced to pay reparations to the French, their former enslavers, and then take out loans from French banks, which just like compounded the interest over time. And amazing reporting. And then the BBC and a bunch of other outlets, I think, just published a bunch of new documents and photos that detail the crimes against humanity against the Uyghurs by the Chinese government. So,
I'll check that out. I haven't seen that. Yeah.
And then last question for you. You're currently on one of the funniest reply all mishaps I've ever seen.
Oh yeah.
Last message was from Noam Chomsky to about 300 people. How's that going?
I had to say, like, I fired up the Wi-Fi on my flight, and I see like an all caps email from Noam Chomsky, which to begin with kind of gets your attention.
Yeah.
But then I realized that somebody had like sent him some like open letter. They didn't like something Noam Chomsky said, but they didn't do the BCC thing. They did the thing where you list every email address. And let me just say, there are like current cabinet officials on this thing. There are all manner of like NSC types and, journalists and these are like Gmails and stuff too. So
there was an email address allegedly for Boris Johnson on there.
Yeah, but I some assistants, checking these emails and like, what the hell's going on here?
There's nothing like being on an accidental CC instead of BCC, especially with old people, because inevitably someone gets pissed off and replies all, please remove me from this chain. And that just sets off a chain of angry events from boomers. And it's just the funniest thing ever.
Some people just do the reply all too, like just kind of unself-aware. I will say, I live in fear of doing this, and I did it once.
Ooh.
I didn't do I thought I'd cut and pasted my context into the BCC. I did it in the CC, and it was super embarrassing.
It happens to the best of us.
Yeah.
It's always a great way to farm some great email addresses.
You know what? I am going through there actually and maybe updating my contacts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see you, Jerome Powell.
Yeah. Okay, Noam Chomsky, like you and I are taking this offline,
No, now we're friends. All right. That's it for today. Good luck with your inbox. And, talk to you guys soon.
See ya.